Edward George. He's the head of group research at Ecobank. He now joins us for a discussion on the rising costs of soft commodities like sugar, coffee, and how this will impact your pocket. But today, Edward, we want to start talking about chocolate. It's interesting because West Africa makes up 70% of the world's global supply, yet it's still seen as a luxury. Not a lot of people are eating it there. Why?
Well, I think one of the real problems with chocolate is that it's very much designed for European tastes. We mostly eat, or European or North American tastes, we mostly eat milk chocolate. So it can melt in very hot climates. If you wanted to make milk chocolate in Africa, you'd probably have to import most of the ingredients, dairy products, flavorings, etc. And so there hasn't really been any effort to develop cocoa products for Africans. So it is the case that in a lot of places in Africa, particularly West Africa, Africans for breakfast might have chocolate powder mixed with milk. They might have chocolate paste, a bit like Nutella, that you put onto toast. But generally, they don't eat much chocolate. I think something like 0.1% of the world's chocolate is consumed in Africa, but 70% of the world's cocoa is produced there.
I mean, I suppose one of the things that is driving chocolate demand globally is a breakfast market that is becoming quite fragmented. I mean, if one goes back 30, 40 years ago, the breakfast market was probably a lot more similar, maybe globally. Maybe a very big breakfast that people had. Today, breakfast is on the cuff. It's something, if you're in a big Western city, you'd be taking something with you on the road in order to eat breakfast. Are we seeing similar trends in Africa as well?
Well, absolutely. And I think particularly in urban areas, the thing to note is that urban populations generally have a much more kind of westernized style of diet. That means eating on the go, a lot more bread-based products, and things like, consuming coffee and consumer goods that we tend to eat in the West as well. So we're seeing this kind of split between the much larger rural traditional populations and the urban populations. You only have to go around Lagos or Nairobi or even Abidjan. You can see KFC, which is opening up, or you can see some, ShopRite, which is turning up, selling a lot of the sort of traditional products that maybe we're more familiar with in the West. But at the same time, I think what is interesting is how many people in Africa actually consume literally on the go. In other words, in the traffic jam, you wind down the window, someone offers you a product. And I think that's where there's a real opportunity with cocoa products. If they could develop cocoa products which don't melt in the heat and which kind of suit that African style of eating on the go, you grab your cassava chips or whatever it might be through the window, then there could be a real market there to develop.
But I suppose one of the things to take into consideration as well is that chocolate is a traditional product. It's something which people grow up with. I mean, you don't have to worry about me. I mean, the merits of chocolate is, I know the merits, and my family know the merits of chocolate very, very well. But for people that haven't grown up with it, it potentially is something that is in a taste that they would have to acquire, and potentially a taste which is which could be difficult for them to acquire. Which means that a lot of these multinationals would have to go and do a lot of research and development, a lot of work in order to make sure that they could actually start selling their products in those markets, and then wait for a generational change. Surely.
Yes, I think you've hit the nail on the head there. It all comes down to R&D. If you look at something like 70 to 80% of the cost of a chocolate bar that you buy is R&D and marketing. It's a cutthroat world out there among the different chocolate makers. They're constantly refining and changing the kind of chocolate bar to the tastes of Europeans and North Americans, primarily, who are the main consumers at the moment. So that really needs to change. There needs to be R&D into looking into how Africans generally consume food. I mean, if we take the case of Ethiopia, they're major coffee drinkers. We should make cocoa products which go very well with the kind of coffee that Ethiopians consume. If it's Kenya, it should be with tea. And it doesn't just have to be sweet things. I mean, we obviously can, produce cocoa products, powder, for example, cocoa powders. That doesn't melt in the heat. That can be mixed with all kinds of drinks and sauces. But even if we look to Mexico, I don't know if any of you ever tried mole poblano, which is a kind of very, very thick, spicy chocolate sauce they put on chicken. I imagine you could do a peppery version for Nigeria, which could be very popular.
Just before we go with and we round up this conversation, Edward, you mentioned research and development being very important, but what about getting this particular product to market? Is that also not an issue here?
Well, I think it is a problem. If you're talking about milk chocolate, it does melt in very hot temperatures. It's not suitable for tropical climates. But if we're talking about biscuits, cakes, powders, maybe cold drinks mixed with cocoa powder or cocoa flavoring, then absolutely they can get to market. As I'm sure you probably experienced, if you go anywhere in Africa, no matter how remote you are, somehow there's someone there who's managing to sell you a cold beer from a cooler. If they can do that, there's no reason why they can't give you something, a cold cocoa product, but something slightly different, designed for African tastes, not European tastes.
Edward, thanks so much for joining us this morning. That was Edward George. He's the head of soft commodities, and he was joining us from Ecobank.